For Germany, the criticism of religion has been essentially completed, and the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. The profane existence of error is compromised as soon as its heavenly oratio pro eris et posis has been refuted. Plea on behalf of Hearth and Home. That's the translation. Man who has found only the reflection of himself in the fantastic reality of heaven, where he sought a Superman, will no longer feel disposed to find the mere appearance of himself, the non-man, where he seeks and must find his true reality. The foundation of irreligious criticism is, man makes religion. Religion does not make man. Religion is indeed the self-consciousness and self-esteem of man, who has either not yet won through to himself, or has already lost himself again. But man is no abstract being squatting outside the world. Man is the world of man, state, society. This state and this society produce religion, which is an inverted consciousness of the world, because they are an inverted world. Religion is the general theory of this world, its encyclopedic compendium, its logic in popular form, its spiritual point d'honneur, its enthusiasm, its moral sanction, its solemn complement, and its universal basis of consolation and justification. It is the fantastic realization of the human essence, since the human essence has not acquired any true reality. The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. Religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion, as the illusory happiness of the people, is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. The criticism of religion is therefore in embryo, the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo. Criticism has plucked the imaginary flowers on the chain, not in order that man shall continue to bear that chain without fantasy or consolation, but so that he shall throw off the chain and pluck the living flower. The criticism of religion disillusions man, so that he will think, act, and fashion his reality like a man who has discarded his illusions and regained his senses, so that he will move around himself as his own true sun. Religion is only the illusory sun which revolves around man as long as he does not revolve around himself. It is therefore the task of history, once the other world of truth has vanished, to establish the truth of this world. It is the immediate task of philosophy, which is in the service of history, to unmask self-estrangement in its unholy forms once the holy forms of human self-estrangement has been unmasked. Thus the criticism of heaven turns into the criticism of earth, the criticism of religion into the criticism of law, and the criticism of theology into the criticism of politics. The following exposition, a contribution to this undertaking, concerns itself not directly with the original, but with a copy, with the German philosophy of the state and of law. The only reason for this is that it is concerned Germany. If we were to begin with the German status quo itself, the result, even if we were to do it in the only appropriate way, i.e., negatively, would still be in an anachronism. Even the negation of our present political situation is a dusty fact in the historical junk room of modern nations. If I negate powdered wigs, I'm still left with unpowdered wigs. If I negate the situation in Germany in 1843, then according to the French calendar, I have barely reached 1789, much less the vital center of our present age. Indeed, German history prides itself on having traveled a road which no other nation in the whole of history has ever traveled before, or ever will again. We have shared the restorations of modern nations, without ever having shared their revolutions. We have been restored firstly, because other nations dared to make revolutions, and secondly, because other nations suffered counter-revolutions. On the one hand, because our masters were afraid. and on the other, because they were not afraid. With our shepherds to the fore, we were only once kept company with freedom, on the day of its internment. One school of thought that legitimizes the infamy of today with the infamy of yesterday. A school that stigmatizes every cry of serf against the knout as mere rebelliousness once the knout has aged a little and acquired a hereditary significance and a history. A school to which history shows nothing but its a posteriori, as did the God of Israel to his servant Moses. The historical school of law. This school would have invented German history were it not itself an invention of that history. A Shylock, but a cringing Shylock, that swears by its bond, its historical bond, its Christian Germanic bond, for every pound of flesh cut from the heart of the people. On the other hand, good-natured enthusiasts, German chauvinists by temperament and free-thinking liberals by reflection, seek the history of our freedom beyond our history, in the primeval Teutonic forests. But how does the history of our freedom differ from that of the wild boar, if it is only to be found in the forests? And besides, everyone knows what is shouted into a forest is echoed back again. So peace to the primeval Teutonic forests. But war on conditions in Germany, by all means. They are below the level of history. They are beneath all criticism, but they remain an object of criticism, in the same way as the criminal who is beneath the level of humanity remains an object for the executioner. In its struggle against them, criticism is not a passion of the head, but the head of passion. It is not a scalpel, but a weapon. Its object is its enemy, which it aims not to refute, but to destroy. For the spirit of these conditions is already refuted. In themselves they are not worthy of thought. Rather, they are existences as despicable as they are despised. Criticism itself does not require any further understanding of its object, for it is already clear about it. Criticism is no longer an end in itself, but simply a means. The essential force that moves it is indignation, and its essential task is denunciation. It must set out to depict the stifling pressure which all the spheres It must set out to depict the stifling pressure which all the different spheres of society exercise on one another, the universal but apathetic ill-feeling and narrowness of vision that both acknowledges and misconstrues itself. All this contained within the framework of a system of government which lives by conserving all this wretchedness and is itself nothing but wretchedness in government. What a spectacle! A society infinitely divided into the most diverse races, which confront one another with their petty antipathies, their bad consciences, and their brutal mediocrity, and which precisely because of their ambivalent and suspicious attitude towards one another are dealt with by their masters without distinction, although with different formalities, as if their existence had been granted to them on license. And they are even forced to recognize and acknowledge the fact that they are dominated, ruled, and possessed as a privilege from heaven. On the other hand, there are the rulers themselves, whose greatness is in inverse proportion to their numbers. The criticism which deals with these facts is involved in a hand-to-hand fight, and in such fights it does not matter what the opponent's rank is, or whether he is noble or interesting. What matters is to hit him. The important thing is not to permit the German a single moment of self-deception or resignation. The actual burden must be made even more burdensome by creating an awareness of it. The humiliation must be increased by making it public. Each sphere of German society must be depicted as the partie honteuse of that society, and these petrified conditions must be made to dance by having their own tune sung to them. The people must be put in terror of themselves in order to give them courage. In this way, a pressing need of the German nation will be fulfilled, and the needs of nations are themselves the ultimate causes of their satisfaction. And even for modern nations, the struggle against the restricted nature of the German status quo is not without interest. For the German status quo is the undisguised consummation of the ancien regime, and the ancien regime is the hidden defect of the modern state. The struggle against the German political present is the struggle against the past of modern nations, which continue to be harassed by the reminiscences of the past. It is instructive for them to see the ancien regime, which in their countries has experienced its tragedy, play its comic role as a German phantom. Its history was tragic as long as it was the pre-existing power in the world, and freedom a personal whim. In a word, as long as it is believed, and had to believe, in its own privileges, as long as the ancien regime as an established world order was struggling against the world that was only just emerging, there was a world historical error on its side, but not a personal one. Its downfall was therefore tragic. The present German regime, on the other hand, an anachronism, a flagrant contradiction of universally accepted axioms, the futility of the ancien regime displayed for all the world to see, only imagines that it still believes in itself and asks the world to share in its fantasy. If it believed in its own nature, would it try to hide that nature under the appearance of an alien nature and seek its salvation in hypocrisy and sophism? The modern ancien regime is merely the clown of a world order whose real heroes are dead. History is thorough and passes through many stages while bearing an ancient form to its grave. The last stage of a world historical form is its comedy. The Greek gods, who already died once of their wounds in Aeschylus's tragedy Prometheus Bound, were forced to die a second death, this time a comic one, in Lucian's dialogues. Why does history take this course? So that mankind may part happily from its past? We lay claim to this happy historical destiny for the political powers of Germany. But as soon as modern socio-political reality itself is subjected to criticism, i.e., as soon as criticism begins to deal with truly human problems, it finds itself outside the German status quo, or it would grasp its object at a level below its object. For example, the relationship of industry in the world of wealth in general to the political world is one of the main problems of the modern age. In which form does this problem begin to preoccupy the Germans? In the form of protective tariffs, of a system of prohibitions of national economy. German chauvinism has made the passage from man to matter, and one fine morning our cotton barons and iron heroes woke to find themselves transformed into patriots. In Germany, therefore, we are beginning to recognize the sovereignty of monopoly within our borders by granting its sovereignty without them. In Germany, therefore, we are able to begin at the point where France and England were about to conclude. The old and rotten order against which these countries are theoretically up in arms, and which they continue to bear only as one would bear chains, is greeted in Germany as the dawn of a beautiful future. A future which scarcely dares to make the transition from cunning theory to pitiless practice. In France and England, the alternatives are posed: political economy or the rule of society over wealth, whereas in Germany they are posed: national economy or the rule of private property over nationality. In France and England, therefore, it is a question of abolishing monopoly, which has progressed to its final consequences. In Germany, it is a question of progressing to the final consequences of monopoly. There, it is a question of the solution. Here, it is only a question of the collision. This is a good example of the German form of modern problems. An example of how our history, like some raw recruit, has up to now been restricted to repeating hackneyed routines that belong to the past of other nations. So if Germany's development as a whole were not at a more advanced stage than Germany's political development, the German would not be able to participate in contemporary problems any more than can a Russian. But if the individual is not confined within the bounds of his nation, still less is the nation as a whole liberated through the liberation of an individual. The Scythians did not advance one step towards Greek culture, because the Greeks outnumbered a Scythian among their philosophers. Fortunately, talking about anarcharsis, that was the Scythian referred to, because the Greeks numbered a Scythian among their philosophers. Okay. Fortunately, we Germans are not Scythians. Just as ancient peoples lived their previous history in the imagination, in mythology, so we Germans have lived our future history in thought, in philosophy. We are the philosophical contemporaries of the present without being its historical contemporaries. German philosophy is the ideal prolongation of German history. Therefore, when we criticize the orbs posthumous works, must be that, of our ideal history, i.e. philosophy, instead of the urs incompletus, you fucking pronounce that? Alright. Therefore, when we criticize the orbs posthumus of our ideal history, i.e. philosophy, instead of the orbs incompletus of our real history, our criticism stands at the center of those problems, of which the present age says, that is the question. What for advanced nations is a practical quarrel with modern political conditions is for Germany, where such conditions do not yet exist, a critical quarrel with their reflection in philosophy. The German philosophy of law and of the state is the only German history which stands on an equal footing with the official modern present. The German nation must therefore link its dream history to its present conditions, and subject not only these conditions, but also their abstract continuation to criticism. Its future cannot be restricted, either to be the direct negation of its real political and juridical conditions, or to the direct realization of its ideal political and juridical conditions. But the direct negation of its real conditions is already present in its ideal conditions, and has almost outlived the direct realization of its ideal conditions by watching developments in neighboring nations. The practical political party in Germany is therefore right to demand the negation of philosophy. Where it goes wrong is its limiting itself to a demand which it does not and cannot achieve. It believes that it can carry out this negation by turning its back on philosophy and mumbling a few irritable and banal phrases over its shoulder at it. Its approach is so restricted it does not even look upon philosophy as a German reality, or it regards it as beneath German practice and its associated theories. You demand that we make the real seeds of life our point of departure, but you forget that the real seeds of life of the German people has up to now only flourished inside its cranium. In a word, you cannot transcend philosophy without realizing it. The same mistake, but with factors reversed, was committed by the theoretical political party, which has its origins in philosophy. Who's a big girl? The party saw in the present struggle only the critical struggle of philosophy with the German world. I could have fucking made it. 6 pages. 18 minutes. I could do that in 12. Alright, here we go. The party saw in the present struggle only the critical struggle of philosophy with the German world, and failed to realize that previous philosophy itself belongs to this world. I'm getting a fucking coffee.